Ever get that feeling like you're kind of just on autopilot for a big chunk of your day?
Oh, yeah, totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just grabbing your phone first thing in the morning or brushing your teeth the same way every single time.
It's like you're not even thinking about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's wild to think that a Duke University study found that something like 40% of our daily actions are actually habitual.
40%.
That's almost half our day running on autopilot. So today we're going to do a deep dive into this whole habit thing and try to understand how much control we really have.
Sounds good.
Our source material is this really interesting podcast episode called Mind Matters, Episode 1, The Science of Habits, How to Rewire Your Brain.
Catchy title.
Right. Hopefully by the end of this deep dive, we'll all have a better grasp on how to build those good habits and kick those bad ones to the curb.
I'm all for that.
But first things first, what exactly are habits?
Well, simply put, habits are those automatic behaviors we do regularly without really thinking about them.
So like my morning coffee routine, I guess.
Exactly. And it's not just actions. It can be thoughts and emotions, too.
Interesting. So it's like our brains are constantly looking for ways to be more efficient.
You got it. It's all about saving mental energy. You know, our brains are amazing, but they can only handle so much conscious thought at once.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does this whole autopilot thing even get programmed in the first place?
Well, every habit starts with a cue. It's like a trigger that tells your brain, hey, time to start this routine.
Like a signal.
Yeah, exactly. Something you see, hear, smell, or even feel that kicks off the whole process. Let's say you smell freshly brewed coffee.
Oh, man. You're speaking my language now.
Right. For a lot of us, that aroma is the cue. It triggers the routine of making a cup, which then leads to the reward, that jolt of energy and focus from the caffeine.
The good stuff.
Exactly. And this three-part cycle, cue, routine, reward, that's the habit loop.
Cue, routine, reward.
Got it.
So basically, the more we repeat this loop, the more ingrained the habit becomes.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's like practicing a skill. The more you do it, the better you get, and the less you have to think about it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But where does the brain actually store all this habit information?
Well, there's a region deep in your brain called the basal ganglia.
The basal ganglia, okay.
Yeah, it's basically habit central. It plays a key role in forming and storing those automatic behaviors.
So what's actually happening in the basal ganglia when we're forming a new habit?
Imagine a forest path. The more you walk it, the clearer and more defined it becomes.
Right. Right.
Well, it's kind of the same thing with your brain. Every time you repeat a habit, the neural connections associated with that habit get stronger.
So my brain is literally rewiring itself based on my habits.
Exactly. It's called synaptic plasticity. It's like your brain is constantly adapting and optimizing based on your experiences.
That's incredible. And a little scary, too. I mean, if our brains are so adaptable, does that mean that bad habits are just as easy to form as good ones?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. Unfortunately, yes, bad habits can be just as ingrained as good ones, especially if they trigger a strong reward response.
And that's where dopamine comes in.
Right. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's associated with pleasure and reward.
Dopamine. The brain's happy juice.
Exactly. Every time you complete a habit loop, your brain releases a little bit of dopamine, which reinforces that connection between the cue, the routine, and the reward.
So even if the habit is bad for me, like, let's say, doom scrolling on social media before bed,
Oh, I know that one.
my brain is still getting that dopamine hit, which makes me want to keep doing it, even though I know I shouldn't.
Exactly. And that's why relying on willpower alone to break a bad habit can be so difficult.
Because willpower eventually runs
You
out.
got it. It's a limited resource.
Yeah.
And we can only resist temptation for so long before we give in.
Oof, that explains so much. So if willpower isn't the answer, then what is? How do we actually rewire those deeply ingrained habits and create better ones?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive. Well, the good news is we don't always have to fight our brains, you know.
Oh, so there's hope.
There is. We can actually use our understanding of the habit loop to our advantage.
Okay, how so?
Remember those three stages: cue, routine, reward. Each one offers a chance to kind of step in and make some changes.
So it's not about, like, suppressing the bad habit entirely, but more about swapping it out with something better.
Exactly. You're basically rewiring those neural pathways to work for you instead of against you.
So like with my stress eating example,
Stress eating, yeah, that's a classic.
whenever work gets crazy, I just find myself making a beeline for the snack drawer. It's like I'm not even aware of it.
Right, well, you've already nailed the first step, which is identifying the cue.
Okay, so I know when I do it, but how do I actually change the what?
That's where step 2 comes in. Start small. Don't try to overhaul your entire routine in one go. It's too overwhelming.
Small changes. Okay.
Exactly. So
Right.
instead of trying to cut out snacks altogether, maybe you just try swapping out those chips for a handful of almonds when the stress hits.
Almonds instead of chips.
Yeah.
I could do that. Feels way less daunting than like going cold turkey on all snacks.
Exactly. And this is where the whole tiny habits idea comes into play.
I've heard that term thrown around, but I'm not really sure what it means.
It's basically this idea that making new habits super easy to adopt makes you way more likely to stick with them.
Kind of like building momentum with those small wins.
Right.
Okay, got it.
And that momentum keeps building as you move on to step 3. Redesign your environment.
Redesign my environment. What do you mean by that?
Think about it. If your goal is to eat healthier, having a bowl of fruit on your desk is going to be a lot more helpful than having a drawer full of candy within arm's reach.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right, exactly. It's about making the good choices easier and the bad choices harder.
I like that. So it's like I'm not fighting my willpower. I'm just setting myself up for success.
Exactly. And then we move on to step 4. Focus on identity.
Identity.
Yeah.
Okay. This is where it gets a little deep, I guess.
It's not about just changing your actions. It's about changing how you see yourself.
So instead of saying I'm trying to quit sugar, I'd say I'm the type of person who makes healthy choices.
Exactly. It's about aligning your actions with your values and who you want to be.
So if I see myself as a healthy person, I'm more likely to actually make healthy choices.
You got it. It's powerful stuff. And finally, we come to step 5. Reward yourself.
Okay, now this is something I can get behind.
It's all about positive reinforcement, you
Right.
know? Celebrate those wins, big or small.
But doesn't that kind of contradict the whole breaking bad habits thing? Like, what if my reward for eating healthy all week is a giant slice of chocolate cake?
The reward doesn't have to be something big or indulgent. It's more about creating a positive association with the new habit. Maybe it's enjoying a cup of herbal tea after a productive day, or taking a relaxing bath after a week of hitting your workout goals.
So it's like training my brain to crave that good feeling I get from the new behavior instead of the old one.
Exactly. And you know what's even more interesting is that these habit-forming principles aren't just for personal goals, you know?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there are all these amazing real-world examples of how organizations have used the power of habits to achieve some incredible things.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me an example.
Have you ever heard of the British cycling team?
Vaguely. I know they're pretty good.
They are. But back in the early 2000s, they were really struggling to make their mark.
What changed?
Well, they hired this guy named Dave Brailsford, and he introduced this radical new approach. He called it the aggregation of marginal gains.
The aggregation of what now?
It's basically the idea of focusing on tiny 1% improvements across every single aspect of their performance.
1% improvements? That doesn't sound all that radical.
But it was, they literally looked at everything, from the aerodynamics of their bikes to the athlete's sleep quality to the type of hand wash they use to reduce the chance of getting sick.
Wait, they're analyzing hand wash?
Yep. They were that meticulous. And, each improvement on its own seemed insignificant, but when you added them all up, it created this massive shift.
So small changes can lead to big results.
Exactly. And it's not just about cycling, This approach can be applied to pretty much anything.
Okay, so we've got the British cycling team. What about something a little more relatable?
Well, let's talk about breaking a smoking habit.
One of the hardest habits to break, for sure.
It is. But research has shown that one of the most effective ways to quit smoking is to substitute a healthier routine for the act of smoking.
So like if you're craving a cigarette, you could chew gum instead or do some deep breathing exercises.
Exactly. It's about creating a new positive association that can gradually override the old negative one.
So it's like hacking into your brain and rewiring those reward pathways.
You got it. And the best part is it's not about having superhuman willpower. It's about understanding the science and using it to your advantage.
This is making a lot of sense. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have, and hopefully it's given you a new perspective on how habits work and how we can actually change them.
It definitely has. It's not just about the what of habits.
Right.
It's about the why and the how.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so empowering.
It really does feel like we've unlocked some kind of secret code here.
Right.
Like this whole time we've been trying to brute force our way through bad habits with sheer willpower. But it turns out there's a smarter way.
Exactly. And yet there are still some pretty common pitfalls that people fall into, even when they understand the science.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, one mistake is trying to change too much at once,
Oh, yeah. Been there. Done that.
We've all been there. And it makes sense when you think about it. Those neural pathways have been reinforced for months or even years. It takes time and patience to carve out new ones.
So it's like expecting to learn a new language overnight. You wouldn't
Yeah.
do that.
Exactly. It's all about setting realistic expectations and focusing on building one new habit at a time.
Okay. One habit at a time.
Oh.
Got it. What's the other common pitfall?
Well, we kind of touched on it earlier, but it's that tendency to rely too heavily on willpower.
Oh, right. Because willpower is like a muscle. It gets tired.
Exactly. It's a finite resource, and we can only push ourselves so far before we burn out.
So instead of white-knuckling it,
Uh,
we should be trying to make our environment work for us.
Precisely. Make it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing.
Okay. I'm definitely starting to see the bigger picture here. Now, before we wrap up, you mentioned something earlier about a thought-provoking question.
Oh, yes. It has to do with the time frame of habit formation.
Okay. So we know that on average, it takes about 66 days to form a new habit.
Right. That's the general consensus.
Yeah.
But the question is it better to focus on one habit at a time, or can we actually work on multiple habits simultaneously?
Yeah, it's a good one. I'm kind of torn on that myself.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Because on the one hand, it makes sense to focus your energy on one thing until it really sticks. But then there's also that idea of momentum, you know?
Like a snowball effect.
Exactly. Like maybe success breeds success.
Yeah.
And you can ride that wave into the next habit change.
That's a valid point, too. I think ultimately there's no right or wrong answer here.
Also, it depends.
It does. It really depends on their personality, their lifestyle, their goals, you know?
So it goes back to that self-awareness piece we talked about.
Exactly. Knowing yourself is key to choosing the right strategy.
Makes sense. Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've not only learned a ton, but I also have a whole new way of thinking about self-improvement.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, no more willpower battles, just strategic rewiring.
I like that. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress.
Exactly. Every journey starts with a single step.
Yeah.
So to all our listeners out there, we hope you found this deep dive as insightful and empowering as we have.
We sure did.
Until next time, happy habit hacking.